July 27th, 1945. 20,000 feet above Tsu, Japan, the bomb bay doors of the B-29 superfortress groaned open, exposing the city below to the cold, thin air of the stratosphere. But the payload that fell was not death. It was paper. Millions of sheets of flimsy paper tumbling and twisting in the violent slipstream. They did not whistle or scream as they descended. They whispered, a sibilant rush of paper on wind, a storm of documents falling on a nation that had been taught to fight to the last soul. Down on the pre-dawn streets, the first of 700,000 leaflets began to land. On the back, a list of 11 cities, a schedule for oblivion. The paper carried a message from the sky. Your city is next. Get out. The project had a secret name, buried deep within the files of the 21st Bomber Command on Guam. They called it a moral bombing run. The men flying the missions had other names for it. Paper routes, propaganda drops, a waste of fuel. They whispered about it in the sweltering Quonset huts on Tinian, wondering at the logic. One week, their orders were to burn a city to its foundations, to create a firestorm so vast it generated its own weather. The next, they were dropping pieces of paper designed by psychologists in Washington. Paper with text drafted by Nisei linguists, young Japanese Americans who pored over dictionaries trying to find the precise words to inspire fear, but not defiance. The pilots knew the name Curtis LeMay. They knew him as the architect of fire, the man who had perfected urban destruction from the air. Now suddenly he was a publisher, his name unofficially attached to these strange airborne pamphlets. The LeMay leaflets, they were called. A warning, a promise, a threat. It was the central paradox of the war's brutal endgame. Why would a military machine geared toward total annihilation pause to issue a warning? Why would the same hand that unleashed the inferno over Tokyo now offer a chance to flee? The official story, the one recorded in the sanitized after-action reports, spoke of humanitarianism. A folder labeled Psychological Warfare Branch Directive 12C stated the objective was to minimize civilian casualties, to prove American mercy in the face of Japanese fanaticism. The reports claimed success. They cited statistics of panicked evacuations, of disrupted war production, of a civilian population beginning to question the divine mandate of its leaders. Rumors existed. Rumors always existed. They spoke of a different motive. Some said the leaflets were a legal maneuver, a way to absolve the United States of war crimes accusations that were sure to come. Others whispered it was purely strategic, a new weapon to turn the Japanese people against their own military, to crack the nation's spirit before the final invasion. A way to save American lives, not Japanese ones. Was this an act of conscience, born in the quiet moments between devastating raids? Or was it the war's most cynical calculation, a psychological masterstroke using the language of morality to achieve a purely military aim, clearing a path for the most terrible weapon of all? The truth of this unprecedented campaign was never meant to be simple. It was scattered, fragmented, hidden in the motives of the men who conceived it, the airmen who executed it, and the civilians who looked to the skies with a new kind of dread. This investigation delves into the declassified memoranda, the forgotten diaries, and the painful testimonies of survivors to uncover the real story behind the paper bombs. A moral bombing run that reveals a complex and unsettling chapter in the history of warfare. One where the line between salvation and destruction was drawn on a piece of paper and then dropped from the sky. May 16th, 1944. Hancock County, Iowa. The land was flat, unforgivingly flat. Corn grew in disciplined rows stretching to a horizon that never seemed to get closer. A place for God, for farming, for quiet lives. Not a place for war. Yet war was there, hidden behind a 10-foot fence and armed guards at a place the maps did not show. Locals whispered about it, a new kind of camp. They said it held prisoners, Germans maybe. Some swore they heard German accents, but the faces behind the wire were not German. They were Japanese. Nobody understood. The war was in the Pacific. The enemy was Japan. These men looked like the enemy. But they wore American uniforms. They saluted the American flag. They were ghosts in the heartland, ghosts speaking a language nobody in Hancock County had ever heard. This was not a prison. It was a school. A very strange school. The folder in a locked cabinet in Washington, D.C. called it the Military Intelligence Service Language School, relocated from the coast. A place to forge a weapon made of words. The idea was not new, it was old, European old. The British had done it first, dropping pamphlets from balloons over France in the Great War. Crude things, promises and threats. The Germans did it back. Words against words. In this new war, the technique was refined, industrialized. The Royal Air Force, then the U.S. Army Air Forces, had rained paper down on the continent. Millions of leaflets. Over France, over Germany, over Italy. 6 million leaflets dropped on Germans in 1 month alone. That's a city's worth of paper. A city's worth of doubt. But Japan was different. An island. A fortress of the mind. In Europe, the leaflets spoke of liberation from tyrants, of a shared heritage. How do you speak to a people who believe their emperor is a living god? How do you offer liberation to a man who would rather die for his country than read a single word from its enemy? The first attempts were clumsy, disastrous. The language was too direct, too American. The tone was wrong. The messages were insults, not persuasion. They were burned for warmth. They were ignored. They failed. And so the Office of War Information was given a new, impossible task, the OWI. A strange collection of advertisers, journalists, artists, and academics. Men who sold soap and cigarettes now tasked with selling surrender. They set up a special division in San Francisco, far from the cornfields of Iowa but tied to them by an invisible thread. They needed a new key to unlock the Japanese mind. They found it in a quiet office at Princeton University. His name was Edmund Carter, a professor of Oriental Studies. 42 years old, thin, bespectacled, with hands stained by the ink of ancient scrolls. He had spent the 1930s in Kyoto not as a tourist but as a student, of language, of culture, of ritual. He understood the unspoken rules, the importance of face, the weight of obligation, the intricate dance of honor and shame. Carter knew that a direct order to surrender was an invitation to suicide, but a hint, a suggestion, a carefully planted seed of doubt that might just grow. Carter and his team began to collect a different kind of intelligence. Not troop movements, not shipping tonnage. They collected poems, folk songs, children's stories, local newspapers. They talked to the Nisei from the Iowa school, young men from California and Hawaii, born American, but with the language of their parents still on their tongues. They were the translators, the bridge. Then the main thing started. They began interviewing prisoners of war, not in interrogation rooms with bright lights, but in quiet places, with tea, with cigarettes, with respect. Sub-Lieutenant Kenji Tanaka, a Zero pilot fished from the waters off Midway, became a key source. He did not talk for weeks. He stared at the wall. He expected death. Instead, Carter brought him a book of haikus by Basho, and they talked. Not about the war, about the seasons, about the beauty of a fleeting moment. Tanaka eventually spoke. He spoke of his duty, his family, his fear for his home. Not his fear of dying, his fear that his country was being led to ruin by fanatics. His words and the words of others like him became the raw material. Carter's team crafted the messages. They used Tanaka's own phrasing. They wrote about the love of a soldier for his family. They quoted Japanese poets. They printed leaflets that looked like local currency or pages from a popular magazine. Credible. Believable. They were whispers from home, dropped from the belly of a monster in the sky. The operation grew, from a professor's theory to a global production line. The OBY designed, the Army Air Forces delivered. The scale became unimaginable. It was no longer a few thousand leaflets from a lone bomber. It was a storm. A B-29 superfortress could carry a special M-129 bomb, a cardboard container designed to burst at 1,000 feet, releasing 80,000 sheets of paper. A blizzard of carefully chosen words. Over 500 million leaflets would fall on Japan before the end. 500 million seeds of doubt. In the last 3 months, the campaign reached its terrible crescendo. The mission changed. It was no longer just about persuasion. It was about warning. 63 million leaflets were dropped on 35 Japanese cities. The tone shifted from a whisper to a scream. The new leaflets were stark, brutal. On one side, a map of the city with the target areas circled. On the other, a message. A message crafted by Carter's team, approved by the highest levels of command. A message that was both a plea and a death sentence. The final drafts were kept in a folder labeled Urgent. The code name for the project was simple: Warning Leaflet Campaign. But the men in the ODY offices in San Francisco, the ones who had studied Basho and talked with men like Tanaka, they had a different name for it. They called it the moral line, the point of no return. The leaflets listed a dozen cities, and they made a promise. A promise of fire from the sky. Leave, the paper whispered. Leave now. Your leaders have lied to you. We do not wish to harm you, the people. But the list of cities was there, a timetable for annihilation printed on a 6 by 8 inch piece of paper, and everyone knew what would come after the paper fell. June 1st, 1945. Honolulu, territory of Hawaii. A sheet of paper weighs almost nothing. A whisper of pulp and ink, but in the right hands with the right words, it becomes a weapon, heavier than a bomb, more precise than a bullet. They had a name for it in the anonymous concrete buildings of the Office of War Information. They called it truth bombing. The truth was about to fall like rain on an empire. The project folder was stamped in red ink, top secret. Inside, the document smelled of fresh mimeograph fluid and stale cigarette smoke. The centerpiece was a leaflet. OY Leaflet 2106. The LeMay leaflet. It was not a request. It was a death notice with an escape clause. A list of names, not people. Cities. Aomori, Ichinomiya, Tsu, Ube, Kurume, Uwajima, Ogaki, Nishinomiya, Koriyama, Hakodate, Nagaoka. 11 cities, soon to be 12, then 35. A neat printed column of targets. The message was brutally simple. Read this list carefully. These cities will be burned to the ground. You have 72 hours to evacuate. 72 hours, not a week, not 4 days. 72 hours. The clock was ticking, printed right there on the paper. They held the mock-up to the light. Sergeant Kenji Tanaka, a Nisei from Fresno, California, checked the kanji for the 10th time. Every stroke had to be perfect. Any mistake, any subtle error in tone, and the message would be dismissed as barbarian propaganda. The paper was thin, almost translucent, designed to flutter and spin as it fell from the belly of a B-29. On one side, the stark, black text of the warning. On the other, a drawing, not a photograph. A drawing. A stylized B-29, silver and menacing, releasing a cascade of cartoonish bombs over a city rendered in flames. The image was crude, deliberately crude. A child could understand it. A terrified mother clutching the paper in a darkened room would understand it perfectly. It was a promise of fire from the sky. The words were a scalpel designed to separate the people from their leaders. The text never said, "We will destroy Japan." It said America was bombing military installations. Factories, dockyards, arsenals. The paper screamed it in perfect, polite Japanese. We are not fighting the Japanese people, but the military clique, the Gumbatsu, which has enslaved them. It was a critical distinction, a seed of doubt planted in the fertile soil of fear and exhaustion. The bombs are not for you, they whispered. The bombs are for the war your leaders refuse to end. This destruction, this rain of fire is their fault, not ours. They have brought this upon you, and only you can save yourselves. It was a brilliant, vicious piece of psychological jujitsu. Then came another leaflet. This one felt different, heavier. The paper quality was better. On it was a face. A man in a suit with thin-rimmed glasses and a tight, determined mouth. Harry S. Truman, the new president, an unknown quantity. Japanese propaganda painted him as a monster, a new butcher eager to exterminate their race. The leaflet showed his portrait, calm and resolute. Beneath it, a message, a promise. Surrender, it said, would not mean extermination or enslavement. It would mean peace. It would mean an end to the B-29s. It was a direct appeal over the heads of the emperor and his generals. A message from one man to 100 million people. Trust me, the face seemed to say. Not them. Two pieces of paper side by side on a desk in Honolulu. Two sides of a single strategy. One was a surrender pass, dropped over the trenches on Okinawa. It showed a smiling American soldier offering a cigarette to a Japanese POW. It promised food, medical care, life. It was a ticket out of a hell the soldier knew all too well. The other was for his wife in Ogaki. It showed a map of her city, a big red circle drawn around her neighborhood. A picture of a house just like hers, engulfed in flames. One offered a hand, the other a fist. Both papers whispered the same thing. The war is over. Your leaders just haven't told you yet. The report started as a trickle, then a flood. Interrogations of captured soldiers, clandestine messages from neutral diplomats in Tokyo, whispers in the marketplace. They were reading them. The people were reading the leaflets. They were hiding them from the Kempeitai, the secret police. In Sioux, after the first warning, the city's population dropped by half in 2 days. People were listening. They were afraid. The paper was working. The truth, even a terrible truth, was a powerful acid, eating away at the foundations of their will to fight. It was working, but it wasn't enough. Not fast enough. In a locked office, down a guarded hallway, a different kind of team was assembled. Physicists, linguists, artists. They were working on a new message, for a new weapon. The files were not labeled with city names. They had code words. Trinity, Fat Man, Little Boy. The leaflet they were designing was simple, stark. It didn't warn of firebombing. It tried to describe the indescribable. It spoke of a bomb with the power of the sun, a flash of light that would consume a city in a single terrible instant. It was the final warning, the ultimate truth, and no one knew if anyone would believe it or if there would be anyone left to read it. August 10th, 1945, Tinian, Mariana Islands. The cargo was not a bomb, not high explosive, not incendiary. It was paper, just paper. Millions of sheets of paper, printed 10,000 miles away in the cool, dry air of San Francisco. The paper had come a long way, a very long way. It crossed the Pacific in the belly of a cargo ship, a slow, salt-stained journey past horizons that never changed. San Francisco, Pearl Harbor, Kwajalein Atoll, then Saipan, and finally here, Tinian. A tiny coral island, scraped flat by seabees, turned into the largest, busiest, and deadliest airfield on the planet. The planes were B-29s, the superfortress. A silver beast, 4 propellers churning the humid air into a deafening roar. They were the same planes that carried fire, the same silver fuselages that had disappeared into the smoke over Tokyo, over Nagoya, over Osaka. The crews were the same too. Men with a 1,000-yard stare burned into their eyes from watching cities melt. Captain John Blackjack Corrigan from Butte, Montana, flew this one. He'd seen Tokyo burn from 25,000 feet. He'd watched Yokohama disappear under a blanket of smoke and flame. Tonight, his bomb bay was full of paper. They didn't just dump it out. That was the first mistake they made, months ago. The bundles would plummet like stones. No, this was a science now, a dark, precise art of delivery. The ground crews, boys from Ohio and Texas with faces slick with sweat, worked under the harsh glare of portable floodlights. They weren't loading 100-pound bombs. They were stacking M126 leaflet bombs. A simple cardboard box, really. A casing packed tight with 1,500 leaflets. A time fuse. A small explosive charge, just enough to split the cardboard open at a preset altitude. Not to kill, just to open the box. To scatter the messages like seeds. Seeds of doubt. Seeds of fear. The folder was called Psychological Warfare Branch, Special Operations. Inside were the diagrams. Drawings of a B-29 bomb bay, but different. The racks were modified. The release mechanisms recalibrated for weight and balance. It was a logistical nightmare. A single B-29 could carry nearly 20 tons of conventional bombs, but paper was bulky, awkward. It took up space. An entire plane, a multi-million-dollar piece of advanced technology, might carry only a ton of paper. A single ton to warn a city of 100,000 souls. The math felt wrong, wasteful, but the orders came from LeMay himself. General Curtis LeMay, the man who orchestrated the fire. He wanted the paper dropped. The process was a grim ballet. The armorers set the fuses. Short delays for high-altitude drops, longer for low. The loaders packed the bays. Carefully, methodically, they slid the M126s into the modified racks. 36 boxes in the forward bay, 40 in the aft. A total of over 100,000 leaflets per plane. They called them Paperboy missions. The pilots hated the name. It sounded safe. It was not safe. The flight to Japan was 8 hours over a black, empty ocean. 8 hours of engine drone and the constant, nagging fear of mechanical failure. The Japanese still had fighters. They still had flak guns around the major cities. Being shot down while carrying paper was no different from being shot down while carrying fire. Dead was dead. There was a timeline, a terrible, unchangeable schedule. The warning leaflets, the ones with the pictures of the B-29s and the list of cities, were always dropped first. The report stated, deliver notice to target municipalities approximately 3 to 5 days prior to strategic bombing. Always. First came the paper, then came the fire. Sometimes the gap was 72 hours, sometimes it was 48. A clock was ticking the moment the first leaflet fluttered out of a bomb bay. A clock was ticking for Nagasaki, for Kumagaya, for Isesaki, for dozens of cities that still stood. Captain Corrigan's target was Hikari, the naval arsenal, 8 hours over the Black Pacific. The navigator, a quiet lieutenant from Wisconsin named Miller, made his calculations on a worn-out chart. The radio man listened to the silence, his ears trained for the faint crackle of a Japanese night fighter's transmission. Corrigan just flew. He watched the 4 RPM gauges, their needles perfectly aligned. He thought about the cargo. Some pilots refused to think about it. Just freight, they'd say, delivering the mail. But Corrigan had read one. A crew chief had given it to him. He'd seen the list of 11 cities. He knew that in a few days, another B-29 crew, maybe men he'd had coffee with that morning, would fly this same route. But their cargo would be different. Their cargo would weigh 20 tons. The bombardier's voice crackled over the intercom. Target in sight. A faint green smudge on the radar scope. Below, the city of Hikari slept under a sliver of moon. The bombardier, a 22-year-old named Leo Pasternak from Brooklyn, didn't use the Norden bomb sight. There was no need for its precision. Saturation was the key. Spread the fear. He flipped a series of red-capped switches. Bombs away! The plane bucked slightly as the load was released, 76 cardboard boxes tumbling into the cold, thin air. For a moment, they were just boxes falling. Then, one by one, they popped. Small, harmless flashes in the dark. A blizzard in the moonlight. A storm of paper swirling down onto the sleeping city. Each sheet a promise. A threat. A death sentence with a postmark from Tinian. Corrigan turned the B-29 for home. The long flight back. Another delivery made. Another clock started. 72 hours. The paper was on the ground now, settling in streets, on rooftops, in rice paddies. In the morning, the people of Hikari would wake up and find them. Messages from their enemy, delivered by a silver ghost in the night. The warning had been given, and now the main thing started. July 30th, 1945. Akasaka, Tokyo. To hold a piece of paper was a crime. Not rice paper brushed with a poem. Not a government bond. A different kind of paper. Thin, foreign, smelling of chemical ink and a world away. This paper fell from the sky. It was a ghost, a truth nobody was allowed to see. The government called it deception paper. Enemy propaganda, lies from the American demons. The Home Ministry issued Directive Number 42, classified but its contents whispered on every corner. Possession was treason. Reading it was a betrayal of the divine emperor. The punishment was simple, severe. The Tokubetsu Koto Keisatsu, the Toko, were tasked with enforcement. They were the thought police. Men in cheap suits with sharp eyes who saw everything. They did not need a confession. A rumor was enough. A neighbor's glance. A flicker of fear in a man's eyes as he passed a patrol. The Toko were worse than the Kemputai. The military police broke your bones. The Toko broke your spirit. Then they broke your bones. Posters appeared overnight on every wall, every telephone pole, every shopfront. A caricature of a grinning Roosevelt, his fangs dripping, holding a leaflet. The caption was stark. 100 million hearts, one mind. Do not be deceived by enemy lies. Below, a smaller line. Report all suspicious materials. Report your neighbor. Report your friend. Report your father. It was just paper, but it carried the weight of a death sentence. Still, they read it. In the dark of a bombed-out cellar. In the flickering light of a single candle behind a blacked-out window. In the privacy of a latrine, with trembling hands. Kenji Tanaka, a clerk from Kanda, found one. It had fluttered down into the small, scorched patch of dirt he called a garden. He was 28. His wife and daughter were gone to the countryside for safety. Or so he told himself. He picked it up. The paper was smooth. Smoother than anything made in Japan now. He hid it in his worn copy of the Kojiki, the ancient records. An act of sacrilege within an act of treason. He waited until the moon was a sliver, until the last patrol had passed, its footsteps fading down the rubble-strewn street. He unfolded it. The B-29 was there, a perfect silver drawing. The B-san, the Honorable Mr. B, the Silver Dragon of Death. And below it, the words, Japanese words. Perfect, polite, terrifying Japanese. Attention Japanese people. Kenji read. He read about the Potsdam Declaration, about unconditional surrender, words the radio never spoke, the newspapers never printed. Then he saw the list. The list. It was always the list that stopped the heart. Osaka, Kobe, Nagoya, Yokohama, Kawasaki, Tokyo, 12 cities in all. The leaflet explained that these cities would be destroyed by air, bombed until nothing remained. It was a warning, a promise. The radio said American planes were being shot down by the hundreds. The radio said the divine wind, the kamikaze, would protect the homeland. The radio said victory was inevitable, a matter of spirit. Of Yamato Damashi. This paper in his hands felt more real than the radio. Colder, sharper. He could feel the B-29s. He could hear them in the silence of his room. He had seen the sky burn over Yokohama. He knew, the government knew too. In a concrete bunker deep beneath the Imperial Palace grounds, two men stood over a table. On the table lay a single leaflet smoothed out under a desk lamp. One man was a general. Old, his face a mask of discipline, his uniform heavy with medals earned in Manchuria, in China. The other was a minister. Younger, in a Western suit, his face pale with exhaustion. Lies, the general grunted. A trick to sow discord, to break our will. He tapped the paper with a rigid finger. They think our people are weak. They mistake politeness for cowardice. The minister did not look at him. He looked at the list of cities. Their intelligence is flawless, General. They named the Mitsubishi plant in Nagoya, the one we finished last month. They named the Sumitomo Metalworks in Osaka. They know our rail lines, they know our timetables. This is not a guess. Spirit will defeat their bombs, the general insisted. His voice was a low growl, the sound of a man who had only ever known one way to solve a problem. With steel, with blood. We have no spirit left to burn, the minister whispered. The words hung in the stale, recycled air, an admission no one dared make above a whisper. We have children with bamboo spears. We have no fuel, no food. We have this. He gestured at the leaflet. Truth. The general's eyes narrowed. Careful, minister. That sounds like defeat. That sounds like treason. The leaflet lay between them, a weapon, not of high explosive, but of information. It had split the room. It was splitting the entire government. The militarists who saw a glorious death for 100 million souls. The pragmatists who saw only death. Just death. Senseless and total. The emperor was silent, waiting. The whispers grew louder in the halls of power. Maybe from the Lord Keeper of the Privy Seal. Maybe from the Foreign Ministry. The leaflet was a catalyst, a poison, a cure. Nobody knew which. Kenji Tanaka folded the paper. He put it back inside his book. He sat in the dark for a long time. The radio had lied. The newspapers had lied. The government had lied. They were all going to die. Not in a glorious battle on the beaches, but incinerated in their homes while the generals in their bunkers talked of spirit. The leaflet offered a choice. Evacuate, live. A post-war survey would find him. An American in a clean uniform with a Japanese interpreter. He would ask questions. Did you see the leaflets? Did you believe them? Kenji Tanaka, older, thinner, but alive, would nod. Yes, he believed. So many believed. They just couldn't say so. They packed small bags. They made excuses. A sick aunt in the country. A pilgrimage to a forgotten shrine. They slipped away from the cities. One by one. A silent, terrified exodus defying the Toko, defying the generals, defying the emperor himself. A rebellion born of a single sheet of paper. But that was later. Much later. Now it was still July 30th. Kenji made a decision. He would go. He would walk. He would find his wife and daughter. He stood up and began to bundle his few remaining possessions into a cloth. A change of clothes. The last of his rice. The book containing the leaflet. A floorboard creaked outside his paper screen door. Kenji froze. The cloth fell from his hands. He held his breath. The wind, maybe. Just the wind whistling through the bones of the city. He waited. Silence. A long, drawn-out silence that stretched his nerves thin. A shadow passed the paper screen. Then another. July 30th, 1945. Akasaka, Tokyo. To hold a piece of paper was a crime. Not rice paper, brushed with a poem. Not a government bond. A different kind of paper. Thin, foreign, smelling of strange ink in the high, cold air from whence it came. Kenji Tanaka did not want to be a criminal. He was a clerk, a man of numbers and quiet obedience. But the memory was from March, before the fire, before the sky rained death. He had found one then, caught in the branches of a barren plum tree. A scrap of paper, not Japanese. The texture was wrong, the message was blunt, an insult. It said, attention. Japanese people. It said American bombers were coming. It said they would destroy military installations, and it said they could not promise that only soldiers would die. It urged civilians to evacuate, to leave the cities. Below the text, a list, a neat, terrifying column of names. Nagoya, Osaka, Kobe, and Tokyo. His city. The paper felt like a lie, a barbarian's trick. He read it again. Then he burned it, the ash disappearing into the cold March wind. Everyone burned them. The Kempeitai said to. The neighborhood association said to believe the paper was to be a traitor. Nobody left. Then came the night of March 9th. The B-29s arrived, not high but low. So low you could almost see the rivets. They dropped not high explosives, but thousands of small fat cylinders, M69 incendiaries. The wind came, a hurricane of fire fed by wooden houses and paper screens. The wind was a living thing, a demon. It picked up men and women and threw them into the canals. The Sumida River did not save them. It boiled. Kenji survived in a concrete cellar, the air thick with the smell of cooking meat. His meat. His neighbor's meat. The before and after was absolute. Before, a world of narrow lanes, the sound of gaeta on pavement, the smell of daikon and grilled fish. After, a flat black desert of ash and charred bone, stretching for 16 square miles. 100,000 people. In a single night. 100,000. That's the population of a small prefecture. Gone. The paper had told the truth. The paper was a prophet, and Kenji had burned the prophet. But Tokyo was not the end. It was only a rehearsal. A test. The real question was for later. The question of a new fire. A different kind of fire. The files in Suitland, Maryland are silent on the subject. Or not silent, contradictory, full of whispers and crossed-out paragraphs. The folder is called Psychological Warfare Target Analysis. It is thick with dust. Did they warn Hiroshima? Did they tell them about the sun killer, the bomb that ate the sky? Some say yes. They whisper of a mission. A B-29 named the Great Artiste, flying with the Enola Gay strike group, dropping not bombs but instruments and leaflets. Leaflets? Always the leaflets. Others say no. A fiction. A post-war salve for a guilty conscience. A story to tell the children, to tell themselves that they had given a choice. The truth is a ghost. It flickers. It lies. Maybe the leaflets were real. Maybe they were just a plan. A hypothetical. The document is known as Leaflet 2106. Its text was drafted in the humid heat of Saipan, debated by men in crisp uniforms who had never seen a Japanese city. It was a masterpiece of terrifying understatement. Attention, Japanese people. Evacuate your cities. Read this carefully as it may save your life or the life of a relative or friend. In the next few days, some or all of the cities named on the reverse side will be destroyed by American bombs. These cities contain military installations and workshops or factories which produce military goods. We are determined to destroy all of the tools of the military clique, which is leading Japan to destruction. But the Americans have a new bomb, a different bomb. We are in possession of the most destructive explosive ever devised by man. A single one of our newly developed atomic bombs is actually the equivalent in explosive power to what 2,000 of our giant B-29s can carry on a single mission. This awful fact is one for you to ponder, and we solemnly assure you it is grimly accurate. You must see for yourself what a single bomb can do. We are giving you this notice so that you can take steps to save yourselves. You can restore peace by demanding new and good leaders who will end the war. We ask that you take this warning and evacuate your cities at once. Mokusatsu. The word hung in the air of the planning rooms. A Japanese word, it means to kill with silence, to treat with silent contempt, to ignore. The militarists in Tokyo had treated the Potsdam Declaration with mokusatsu. The question was, would the people of Hiroshima do the same with Leaflet 2106? If it ever reached them, if it was ever dropped. On the back of the theoretical leaflet, a new list, a new column of death, 12 names: Amagasaki, Omuta, Ube, Ichinomiya, Nishinomiya, Ogaki, Kurume, Koriyama, Tsu, Wakayama, Kokura, and Hiroshima. It was the ultimate case study, the final exam. Could paper stop a population from being vaporized? Could words halt an atom? The decision was not about mercy. It was about psychology, about breaking a will, about proving a point so profound it would end a 6-year war. The paper was part of the weapon, the prelude, the justification. August 5th, 1945, Tinian Island. The night was heavy and wet. Young men checked manifests under the harsh glare of electric lights. Fuel, fuses, rations, and paper. Crates of paper. A young lieutenant from Ohio, name lost to the archives, signed a form. He was told they were dropping warnings. Warnings for the cities on the list. The list of 12 cities. The one with Hiroshima at the top. He didn't know about the other plane. The one named for a pilot's mother. He didn't know what was in its belly. He just knew his cargo was paper. The papers fluttered down. White ghosts against a dark, sleeping city. Warnings, prophecies, excuses. Below, the people of Hiroshima were sleeping. They had 6 hours left to live. August 7th, 1945, Washington, D.C. The city's air was a wet blanket, thick with summer and the groaning engines of diplomacy. In the Pentagon, however, the air conditioning hummed a different tune, a cold tune, a clinical hum that smelled of ozone and bleached paper. They said the temperature was kept low to preserve the maps. But the men inside knew it was to keep their own minds from boiling over. On a polished mahogany desk, a scale existed. Not a brass one, not a real one. One that lived only in the mind of Brigadier General Bonner Fellers, MacArthur's man for psychological warfare. On one side, he placed a single flimsy sheet of paper, leaflet number 2106, the so-called LeMay leaflet. On the other, he placed a city of ghosts, a city of ash. 100,000 souls vaporized under a mushroom-shaped sun. The weight was not equal. It could never be equal. The official folder was labeled Awi Afpak Project 27, but its working title in the hushed meetings between men from state, war, and the OSS was Operation Conscience. That's how they framed it. A humanitarian gesture. The top-line directive, signed by a committee of colonels and academics, Finch, O'Brien, Wallace, Kaufman, Gross, was clear. The primary objective of leaflet dissemination is the preservation of non-combatant life by providing advance notice of aerial bombardment. It sounded good. It sounded right. It sounded like something you could tell your children you did during the war. But it was not the entire truth. The truth rarely is. Deep in a separate file under a higher classification, a different memorandum told a different story. It was written by Dr. Alistair Finch, a 42-year-old behavioral psychologist on loan from Columbia University. His words were not about preservation, they were about deconstruction. The leaflet is a scalpel. Its purpose is not to evacuate the city, which is a logistical impossibility, but to sever the psychological connection between the citizen and the state. It introduces a single corrosive element, the belief that the government cannot protect you. To sow doubt, to grow fear. That was the real mission. A humanitarian gesture. The phrase was repeated in cables, in press briefings, in quiet justifications over whiskey at the Army and Navy Club. A humanitarian gesture. But the gesture was followed by a fist. 67 cities from Tokyo to Toyama received the paper promise of destruction, and then they received the destruction itself. 100,000 dead in Tokyo, 58,000 in Kobe, 40,000 in Nagoya, a litany of the damned, all foretold on cheap paper dropped from the bellies of silver beasts. The critics, the few who dared to speak, called it a moral charade. How does a mother with 3 children evacuate a city in 12 hours when the trains are reserved for soldiers, and the roads are cratered from the last raid? Where do they go? The leaflets offered a choice that was no choice at all. It was the illusion of mercy. The scales in Feller's mind groaned. Saving lives on one side. Waging total war on the other. The paper was so light. The ashes were so heavy. The leaflets were not a shield for the innocent. They were a signed confession for the perpetrators. We are telling you we are coming to kill you. You cannot run. You cannot hide. Your death is now your own fault. That was the unspoken message. That was the true psychological warfare, and it worked. It worked beautifully. It did exactly what Dr. Finch's cold, academic prose predicted. Whispers started in the breadlines in the rubble of bombed-out homes. The Americans know everything. They name our cities before they burn them. The emperor is divine, but the Bisons are real. The army has failed us. The paper slips became a virus of the mind, more potent than any propaganda from Radio Tokyo. The war was no longer just in the sky above. It was in the heart of every citizen. The war was inside their heads. Then came the final leaflet. It was different. It felt heavier somehow. The paper was the same, the ink was the same, but the words were from a different world. It did not just list 12 cities. It spoke of a power equal to 2,000 of our giant B-29s. It described a new and most cruel bomb. It was a warning, yes. It was a humanitarian gesture, they would say. But it was also the ultimate act of psychological terror. A proclamation of a new and terrible God. Fellers looked at the cable on his desk. The leaflet had been dropped. Over Nagasaki, over Kokura, over other cities on a list that felt like a death warrant. It was a choice. It was a threat. It was a prayer and a curse printed on a slip of paper. And the answer to its terrible question was already screaming across the Pacific, nestled in the belly of another silver plane. The answer was on its way. October 23rd, 2003, Fort Bragg, North Carolina. The photograph was grainy, black and white. A city seen from the sky, dusted with white specks, like ash, like snow in summer. It was not snow, it was paper. The recruits, none older than 21, stared at the screen. They saw a ghost of a war they knew only from books. A war of propeller planes and iron bombs. This was something else. Something quieter. Master Sergeant Cole, a man whose face was a roadmap of forgotten desert campaigns, pointed a laser at the image. The red dot danced on the flurry of paper. This, he said, his voice as dry as sand, is the birth of our trade. This is where the modern war for the mind began. Not in a lab, not in a book, but in the sky over Japan. The paper was the weapon. The paper was the message. The paper was the ghost in the machine. They called them the LeMay leaflets, a name whispered in the corridors of the Pentagon even today. General Curtis LeMay, the man with the cigar and the eyes of a hawk, the man who wanted to burn Japan to the ground. But first, he would talk. A strange kind of conversation, screamed from 30,000 feet. The precedent was set. A rule was written in the thin air over Nagoya, Osaka, Kobe. You could now speak to the enemy's population directly. You could bypass their government, their military, their censors. You could plant a seed of doubt, a seed of fear, a seed of hope. From the B-29s over Tokyo to the C-130s over Baghdad, from the silver superfortress to the gray Hercules. The delivery method changed. The message did not. The legacy was absolute. It was doctrine. In the decades that followed, the paper fell everywhere. It fell on the frozen hills of Korea, promising warmth and food to shivering Chinese soldiers. It fell on the jungles of Vietnam, offering amnesty and a path out of a war that had no end. Schneider, Becker, Wagner, Kaufmann, Kleine, Gross. The names on the leaflets dropped on German soldiers were different, but the promise was the same. It fell on the deserts of Iraq, showing images of surrendering soldiers eating fresh meals. Fallujah, Kandahar, Sirte, Mosul. The paper falls. The message lands. The mind surrenders. Or it breaks. The effect was the same. A soldier who questions is a soldier who hesitates. A soldier who hesitates is a soldier who dies. But there was another legacy. A darker one. A question that still hangs in the air with the leaflets. You can see it in the archives now. At the National Archives in College Park, Maryland, they are kept in acid-free folders in climate-controlled vaults. Item 243.5.6. A single sheet, brittle, yellowed. On one side, a map. On the other, text in stark Japanese characters. Read this carefully as it may save your life or the life of a relative or friend. The politeness was chilling. We are determined to destroy all the tools of the military clique. We ask that you evacuate these cities at once. A warning. Was it mercy? That's what the papers in Washington said. A humanitarian gesture. A new, more moral form of warfare. They said it gave civilians a choice, but what choice? Flee your home, your job, your life, and become a refugee? Or stay and be incinerated? The lawyers at the Judge Advocate General's office debated it for months. The files are still classified. Rumors said the debate was heated, that a young captain, a man named Elias Thorne, called it the illusion of clemency. He argued it was a more profound form of terrorism, not just threatening death, but making the victim complicit in their own survival, forcing them to choose. The argument was noted, and then it was buried. The leaflets were approved. The precedent was set. A warning is not mercy. A warning is a threat with a deadline. Today they call it roof knocking. A small, non-lethal munition dropped on a building in Gaza or Mosul. A text message sent to a phone. A phone call from an unknown number. A voice speaking in your own language telling you to leave. Your building will be destroyed in 10 minutes. The principle is identical. The technology has evolved, but the moral corrosion is the same. Does a warning absolve the killer? Does telling someone you are about to shoot them make the bullet just? The question echoes from the courtrooms in The Hague to the briefing rooms at Fort Bragg. There is no answer. There is only the hum of the drone. And then there is the paper itself. In the Smithsonian, a few of the original leaflets are displayed under soft light. They are artifacts now, relics. Stripped of their deadly purpose, they are just objects of historical curiosity. The curator's note calls them ephemera of conflict. Ephemera, something that exists for a day, but their impact is permanent. Students from Georgetown and Johns Hopkins come to study them. They analyze the font, the word choice, the psychology of the layout. The work of the Nisei linguists, men like Sergeant Kenji Yasui, born in California, whose parents were in an internment camp in Arizona while he crafted sentences to break the will of their homeland. His translation of surrender versus cease resistance was a matter of life and death. He worked 18-hour days, fueled by stale coffee, and a desperate hope that his words could end the war, that his words could stop the fire. Nobody knew if it worked. Not really. The post-war analysis is in a file cabinet somewhere, locked away. The folder was codenamed Paper Storm. The reports were sanitized. They claimed the leaflets caused mass evacuations, that they saved 1 million lives. Who knew? They whispered other things in the debriefings, that the warnings created panic, clogging the roads and making conventional bombing even deadlier, that they hardened the resolve of some civilians, that the entire program was a sideshow, a way for Washington to feel better about the firebombing, a way to wash their hands before dipping them in blood. How do you quantify a seed of doubt? How do you pull a ghost? Master Sergeant Cole switched the slide. The black and white image of the B-29 vanished. In its place, a silent, high-definition video. A predator drone, a gray insect of death, hung in a perfect, cloudless sky. Below, a landscape of brown hills and dusty tracks. Afghanistan. Maybe, or Yemen, or Somalia. It did not matter. "This is today," Cole said softly. The recruits watched, mesmerized. A small hatch on the drone's belly opened. No missile, no bomb. A cloud, a dense brick of paper, ejected and then burst open, unfurling in the slipstream. Thousands of white and green sheets tumbled through the air, catching the desert wind, fluttering down towards a small village of mud brick houses. Snow in summer. The technology had changed. The altitude had changed. The language had changed. But the question written on every single piece of that falling paper was exactly the same. The oldest question in war. Was this mercy? Or was it just a more sophisticated way to aim? But can a sheet of paper truly absolve the fire that follows? The answer flutters, lost somewhere over the Pacific. A ghost in the archives. It lives in the memory of a single leaflet, thin and translucent, designed to spin as it fell. It hides in the classified ink of Directive Number 42, a command for silence against a sky full of whispers. It echoes in the cold, strange logic of Brigadier General Bonner-Fellers, and in the silent flight of a B-29, dropping not death but data. The truth was not a single document. It was a contradiction, a moral calculation in an immoral equation. A bombing run of paper, a bombing run of fire. The truth remained somewhere between the lines, between the word and the weapon, between mercy and mathematics. They came as warriors armed with words. They came as warriors armed with atoms, an attempt at humanity, an act of total war. One lived in the air for minutes, the other lives in our minds forever. History records the mushroom cloud. It rarely hears the rustle of the paper that fell just moments before. We are left with the silence between the two sounds. The silence where a choice was offered and a choice was made. A silence that asks a single terrible question. What is the sound of a life that was warned but not saved?